It is Wednesday on the North Shore Drive podcast. Hey, everybody, it's Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, in for Christopher Carter on this episode. He's taking some well-deserved time off. So I have Brian Batka. We're going to be talking some Brandon Aiyuk, the latest there. He's requested a trade formally, reportedly. So that's the drama that doesn't seem to end, but we're going to get Brian's latest thoughts on that. We're going to talk about the joint practices that the Steelers have scheduled with the Buffalo Bills. How much of a departure from the business as usual is that for this group? Then we're later going to talk about a report from Diana Rossini saying that the Steelers are cultivating packages for Justin Fields. It's a thing. We might see him in the red zone this season if her reporting is to be believed. So lots to talk about there. Looking forward to it. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Adam. Just, settling back in here. And a week from today, we'll have the Steelers reporting to training camp over at St. Vincent College in Latrobe. So just soaking up the last few days of not making the lengthy drive each day to practice, to work, to the media center there.
Yes, and hopefully the weather will be a little bit nicer for you in that first week than it's been scorcher. If you don't live in Pittsburgh, it's been hot as heck here. So hopefully that'll be nice. All right, Brian, let's get into the Brandon Aiyuk conversation. So he's a name we've been talking about for months, well before the draft process started. Then nothing happened at the draft, and there was a suggestion, maybe something could still happen for the Steelers. They still need that number 2 receiver across from George Pickens.
Do you think we've talked about him more than 49ers media outlets at this point, Adam?
Yeah, you almost wonder if we have. So there's a part of me that's like reluctant to bring it up. But there was some significant news this week. He is reportedly formally requesting a trade as they could not arrive at a contract extension. There's only so many places that he could realistically go. And the Steelers are one of them. And then George Pickens kind of fanned the flames this week. He posted a picture of Aiyuk on his Instagram. So Brian, what is your read on where that situation stands and how likely it is that Brandon Aiyuk could be a Steeler, if not in the next week before training camp, then at some point once they report to St. Vincent?
Yeah, I didn't see the cryptic George Pickens post. I'm sort of out of the George Pickens Instagram game these days. But yeah, I mean, I guess this is significant news. I feel like we all, whether it was formal or not, understood that Aiyuk did not want to be there if they weren't going to extend him. So the fact that his representation reportedly said, okay, we're putting this in writing or whatever now, it's a slight development, but I think it's just been, strange the way this has all played out with Aiyuk. He's not only a guy who's a bit disgruntled and feels he needs to be paid more compared to his peers around the league, but the way he's handled all of this too has been sort of bizarre. And that's one thing that it's like, does that not give us any pause or any hesitation in Steeler Nation land? I'm not saying he's a bad guy or anything, but just the way that he's filming himself FaceTiming and sort of putting some behind the scenes business out there on Front Street, it just makes me wonder what would be the dynamic if he comes in here with George Pickens. And clearly I don't think he would come here unless the Steelers are ready to back up the Brinks truck for him. And what sort of, schism does that cause between him and Pickens, who that's what's curious to me, Adam, is that the Steelers are always bandied about it. I think they're the betting favorite now, if that it should even be such a thing in these player acquisition deals, especially for somebody like Brandon Aiyuk. No offense to him, but it's not like we're talking about, the next stop for a star quarterback or anything like that. Anyway, it's not as if the Steelers don't have a really talented number 1 receiver already on the roster. Like if this were the Chargers, who, I don't even know who their receivers are anymore. They drafted Ladd McConkey this year, but other than that, it's, Quentin Johnston, who's looking like he might be a bust already, DJ Chark, who's kind of a journeyman at this point, and just some sort of whatever type guys. That would make sense for a team that's going to pay Aiyuk top 5, top 6, top 7 receiver money. I don't think the Steelers are constructed in a way that they really need to feel compelled to do that. But I guess as cheap as they're working things right now at quarterback, maybe they can talk themselves into it. Maybe they will. But there's that caveat, and there's the draft compensation hurdle that they would need to get over to make it worth the 49ers while. That's why I still wouldn't bet on this happening, but it does seem like something that Omar Khan at any time could decide to push the red emergency button, and all of a sudden we're back with a major story on our hands.
Well, you mentioned the way the Steelers are constructed, and I think some of this contract drama that we have talked about are just contracts that are up and available to be negotiated. The Steelers have not gotten into any of that business really. A week out of training camp, Pat Freiermuth still doesn't have a deal. Cam Hayward still doesn't have a deal. Najee Harris, I don't think we super expect him to get a deal, but you could put him in that category of guys that are up for contract extensions that don't have them. To what extent do you think those conversations are being impacted by either interest in Brandon Aiyuk or a lack thereof? Do you think they're waiting to see how that domino falls to determine how they make some of these other decisions on who they're going to bring back from that group of guys I mentioned?
I don't think so. I just get the sense that with all of these situations, whether it's a trade for Aiyuk, an extension for Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, or Cam Hayward. I mean, pretty much any financial dealings. I think Omar Khan is the type of GM who's going to say, look, we've got to find the right value here. We've got to make sure what we're doing is prudent for now and down the line. So when he negotiates with these players and their agents, it's probably a matter of, okay, here's what we think is right and fair for the Steelers, and this is the best we can do. If you don't like it, then we'll circle back later on. But if you do, then let's work something out. So I just don't think he's going to be pressured into anything like that. I feel like we're already sort of seeing the way he operates. A lot of us on the outside think, oh, slam dunk, Najee Harris, 5th-year option. Omar Khan puts up the Mutombo finger wave and says, no, no, no. Running backs are not, at least this running back is not on our radar for that kind of money. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a little bit of a different outlook, I suppose, than people might have thought with this roster. And I don't necessarily blame him for that. I think he's going to be more of a cold and calculating GM than we've seen from Kevin Colbert's tenure. Not that he couldn't make tough decisions. And, clearly they did rip off some Band-Aids with beloved players late in their careers. But for Omar, he's in a different situation right now than Colbert was for the last decade and a half of his tenure. He had Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback. That is a bar that you're starting with that's pretty darn high, and you just kind of have to fill in around him and make those right moves. Omar is really trying to kind of rebuild basically the entire offense and, walk that fine line of keeping an elite defense. So I don't know that I think the Aiyuk and, veteran extension stuff are playing into each other too much, but they are all pieces of the puzzle. To me, the bigger domino, Adam, is just, do you want to paint yourself into a corner at receiver when George Pickens, he might be ready to take that leap. He might be ready to take that next step and ascend. Then all of a sudden you might be in this awkward spot next offseason where it's, how much can we afford to pay our top 2 wide receivers? Maybe we can, but then we might have to go super cheap again at quarterback. And where's that going to leave you?
Yeah, and I think that's why I brought up, Freiermuth, Hayward, and Najee, because I don't think, individually we're talking about money for those guys that's going to add up to significant in the context of a possible Brandon Aiyuk sign and trade. But when you add them up collectively, I mean, you could come up with 20 million between those 3 guys if you choose Aiyuk over them. But you don't see that pot of limited funds and say, you get these 3 or you get this one, or you get one of those 3 and you get one of Brandon Aiyuk, just because there is, such limited money under the cap.
No, because I think there's always ways to kick the can down the road. It's just a matter of if you want to, and if the Steelers are a team that wants to. They did that for a really long time to keep that window open with Ben at quarterback. And now I think it becomes more of a question of, is the juice worth the squeeze at the moment for the quote unquote all in, spending that cash over cap and maybe, limiting your ability to maneuver years down the line. So that's what I think you kind of have to ultimately determine. And it's going to be tough to determine that until you see Russell Wilson out there in 2024 with this outfit, beyond training camp, probably even beyond preseason. You talk about fool's gold, 2023 Steelers exhibition games with Kenny Pickett under center was exhibit A of what that can be. So you might not really start, connecting all those dots until week 1 in Atlanta against the Falcons, and all the box score watching of Russell Wilson's 2023 numbers goes out the window. All the offseason hype train goes out the window. What does he actually look like when another team is fighting for its NFL livelihood? Does he still have it? I think it's just difficult to say right now, and there's so many other trickle down effects that are impacted by that.
We'll get you out of the segment on this. What's the timeline, do you think, when we're going to know whether or not they're going to make this trade? Is it the end of training camp? Is this something that are we still going to be having this conversation as in the periphery into the season, or do you think they're going to reach some point where they're like, this is our group and we're moving forward without Aiyuk, in 2024?
I mean, I tend to think this wouldn't drag out into the regular season because the 49ers are a team that's a legitimate Super Bowl contender, a legitimate threat to get back to it and maybe even get over the hump this time. So it's just hard for me to envision a scenario where Aiyuk still wants out once the real games have started and they're willing to move him at the deadline, because I don't think they're going to be 2-6 or anything like that. That would be pretty surprising. If that is the case, then sure, maybe push comes to shove, and that's when you can get a bargain price on them if you're the Steelers. But then there'd be a whole other slew of teams in the mix at that point, I imagine. So I'd say just week 1 would probably be the deadline. But even then, if you're San Francisco, you're putting in your new plays, you're getting new guys involved, working new personnel throughout training camp in the preseason, and then you'd take out a key cog from it. So I just say no hard and fast deadline, but the further we get into the calendar year, the less likely it is that it's going to happen. And we might still be talking about this for days and weeks on end, but I'll still just come back to, I think the Steelers are a team that's built in a way that they don't need to overpay for Aiyuk, whether that's what they give back to the Niners or what they would be giving him in an extension. I know what makes sense compared to the guys who got paid this offseason: Jalen Waddle, Nico Collins, Michael Pittman, Amon-Ra, St. Brown. But just because your neighbor is spending too much on a new car doesn't necessarily mean that you should too. And I think with George Pickens here, somebody aggregated it. I was on the radio or whatever, or maybe in a chat, just saying, if Aiyuk comes here, what do you think he's going to expect to be? He's going to expect to be the unquestioned number 1. So, I mean, where does that leave Pickens? I think you'd be back to square one with a couple guys who are maybe not always singing Kumbaya all the time on that offense.
Yeah, extremely true. Brian, we're going to talk about the Steelers joint practices, kind of stepping out of their norm and scheduling those with the Buffalo Bills. Before we get into that, also wanted to thank our sponsor. It's Mike's Beer Bar. They have hundreds of available beers located right next to PNC Park on the North Shore. Many of those beers are from the local area. They have steak and seafood on a sizzling lava stone. You cook your steak to the temperature that you prefer, and cook it how you want and enjoy that maybe before a Pirates game down on the North Shore. And of course, they have dozens of TVs to watch whatever game you'd like. Or the Summer Olympics are coming up, so you can ask them to put on some swimming or some track and field. They'll have access to all of that. It's the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. So make sure you stop by, and when you get there, tell them Chris Carter sent you, even though I'm the one telling you to go.
It's always Chris.
Back on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Adam Bittner. He's Brian Bacco. Brian, we're going to talk about the joint practices the Steelers scheduled. They will be dancing with the Buffalo Bills during training camp this year. It's not something they've done for some time. I certainly remember, some Camp Cower days where they did that, but it's certainly outside their modern norm, I think. What was your reaction to the scheduling of that event and what impact it could have on the season.
They're going to be locking horns with the Buffalo Bills, Adam. It was right there for you. But yeah, I mean, they've done this. I think it was 8 years ago was the last time. So it's been part of the process under Tomlin as well. But clearly, Mike has not been as willing to do it in recent years. No teams were doing it in the COVID season, and I think that probably made things a little chaotic there for a couple off seasons. But yeah, getting back to it this year with Buffalo, a team that's obviously not too far. I think the travel logistics are always a factor here. I think familiarity with the other team, and in this case, the coaching staff, is always part of it too. And we know Sean McDermott and Mike Tomlin go way back to their college down in Williamsburg, Virginia, with the tribe of William and Mary. So it is interesting to me, though, that these last couple times these teams have played, things have gotten a bit chippy in the playoff game, and then that regular season game a couple years ago, DeMar Hamlin on Kenny Pickett, pit on pit physicality there, and then Kenny fighting back. But yeah, I mean, these two teams know each other very well from matchups recently. They've played against each other, not quite as much as divisional foes, but feels like they're a rung below that. So yeah, it's not something that I want to overanalyze, but I do give the Steelers credit because, call it like you see it. We've been critical of them at times for, hey, is the way they do things getting stale? Are they resistant to change? Are they not willing to try some different things? And they are old school and traditional in a lot of ways, not renegotiating contracts in season. They won't budge on that. There are even kind of, sillier, continuing to hold training camp off site and not really being willing to, get with the rest of the league in that trend. Not saying it's right or wrong, but there are holdouts there. Even dumb stuff like jersey numbers, not letting the relaxed rules really take effect for most guys. Patrick Queen being an exception, not handing out number 1. So that there are things they cling to, but in this case, yeah, I mean, I give them credit for being willing to at least try something new. I don't think one or two joint practices is going to turn them from a 10-7 team to 12-5 or anything like that. But I do tip my cap a bit for them trying something different if they feel like they've gotten off to some rough starts in the regular season. They certainly did last year against the 49ers at home. Mike Tomlin actually extolled the virtues of these joint practices last time they did it in 2016, saying how good it is to see unfamiliar faces, not just see the same defenses and coverages all the time as you do against each other. And that could be particularly beneficial this year when you are going to be evaluating that quarterback spot so closely. Not that I think it's a true competition, but I'm guessing Russell Wilson's not going to be playing a ton in the preseason. So at least you can use this as a little bit of bonus reps for him in that whole new look offense.
Yeah, I think you led into my next question well, which is, to what extent is the way the Steelers have just not kind of clicked into gear until midseason part of the calculation here? Certainly they haven't had dramatically terrible starts every year, and I wouldn't say that's a trend, but it is a trend that this team, takes some time to gel, and that they tend to play their best football in the second half of the season. And we also know that Mike Tomlin is a team builder, and I think he views that as a key part of his role, right? Is making sure the team is constantly getting better and building toward getting there. Do you think he's looking at this as an opportunity to accelerate that timeline a little bit? And maybe they're not going to be the team they're going to be in December, in early September, but maybe they hit their stride a little bit earlier than they have in the last few years.
That could be part of it. Probably going to have a couple rookies starting on the offensive line as well, at least one of them at center with Zach Frazier. So yeah, there are some of those moving parts, but you could have said that for last year too, with Broderick Jones coming in here and Kenny Pickett trying to take the next step up in his second season. I mean, they've always, I think, emphasized a grueling training camp and what that can mean for making you better in the, from the dog days of summer to the bitter cold of December and January football. I think Tomlin enjoys all of those aspects of it. And part of the reason they do still go away to St. Vincent College is to really hunker down, focus on football, learn about the guy next to you, all that team bonding stuff, the intangibles that you can't really put a win-loss record on, but I clearly they believe in that stuff. And joint practices get debated at times around the league because some people said, well, I mean, even Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan have said, their own practices are physical enough when they get into backs on backers and O-line, D-line, one-on-one. I mean, we see scrums all the time out there at Chuck Noll Field between teammates. Do you really need another team to come in here? And sometimes it gets out of hand when two teams, they're itching to see people in different colored jerseys. And then sometimes people lose their heads, and you guys got guys getting kicked out of practice. You've got Aaron Donald swinging helmets on, who was it, the Bengals, I think, a few years ago. So sometimes the joint practices are rightly criticized for being, maybe not quite worth, all the chaos of the travel and that kind of stuff. But, for the Steelers and the Bills, as long as they're professional about it, and, you're going to try out maybe new special team stuff with the kickoff role changing, I think it's a pretty good thing. And yeah, any step that the Steelers take to try to get off to a faster start, especially with how difficult the second half of the season is going to be, I commend them for that.
Well, and you wonder too, I think, that fourth preseason game is something that you understand why players were leery of, because they added an extra game to the regular season, and there had to be a give somewhere. But I think coaches are always going to want more evaluation time, right? And so the absence of that fourth preseason game, maybe this is the Steelers' way to compensate for that a little bit and get, that evaluation that they've been missing for the last handful of years. Brian, we're going to come back. We're going to talk about a Diana Rossini report about Justin Fields here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Final segment on a Wednesday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Adam Bittner, in for Chris Carter, here with Brian Bacca. We're talking a Diana Rossini report that the Steelers definitely have some Justin Fields packages in the offing, that Arthur Smith has been developing them for the red zone, and that they're apparently so advanced that other teams are already preparing to face those packages. Brian, I was a little surprised with the definitiveness of that report. I think it's certainly a topic we've talked about on podcasts. Could the Steelers do it? Is that something that would, bother Russell Wilson? Do you really want to risk, upsetting the apple cart with him to find ways to get Justin Fields in? How do you view that report that this is something that Arthur Smith is working on in earnest, and who are you taking off the field to get Justin Fields on it?
I'm skeptical for a couple of reasons. First of all, it makes sense for the Steelers and Arthur Smith to want that out there. I'd be like, yeah, defensive coordinators around the league, when you're prepping for us, get ready to see Justin Fields at the Wildcat, lined up at wide receiver. You got to spend your precious practice time on all that stuff, even if they have zero intention of doing it. So there's maybe a tiny bit of gamesmanship involved there. Oh, and prepare for him on the kick return unit as well. But no, I think, first of all, I don't recall hearing or seeing much about that in OTAs and in minicamp. That doesn't mean they won't work it at walkthroughs when we're not there, or maybe they'll start looking into some of that in training camp. But Mike Tomlin hasn't done much of that throughout his career. Granted, he had a future Hall of Famer and two-time Super Bowl winning quarterback. For the bulk of it, you don't really want to take that guy off the field much. But in this case, Russell Wilson, I think one of his strengths at this point of his career is his ability to make plays in that red zone area. I think that's maybe still a club that he has in his bag. And, do you take him off the field for the chance of a cold Justin Fields coming in and now he needs to throw a high leverage pass, or you're just putting a defense in a situation where they kind of know he's going to use his legs? Is that even going to work out for you? I think in general, it's good to have a lot of wrinkles like that at your disposal. Maybe Matt Canada didn't do a lot of that kind of stuff the last season and a half because he was under so much pressure. Maybe it was just, and from the top down perspective, maybe Mike Tomlin wasn't giving him a lot of freedom to do that. 'Cause it's just like, hey, we need to make sure we're doing the basic stuff right. You're our offensive coordinator, and a lot of the times our offense looks very uncoordinated when it comes to penalties, missed blocks, missed holes, miscommunications. between quarterback and receiver. Let's be a little bit more functional before we get cute. Now, there was the Derek Watt touchdown pass a couple seasons ago in Philly. It's not like they've been allergic to trick plays, but I mean, I think back to last year in training camp where the Kendrick Green fullback stuff had a moment in the sun. They worked on it in practice, and then it never really saw the light of day beyond that. So, I mean, I think all of this stuff sounds good in mid-July. I'm just, like I said, I don't quite buy that that's going to be too much of a storyline in 2024. On one hand, maybe it keeps Justin Fields engaged to some degree if he's not starting. The flip side of that, though, I mean, based on when I talked to him about the kick return nonsense, he wants to win the job. Like, he wants to be the number one starting back, not the guy who's spelling Russell Wilson for a snap or two here or there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to have the package in the playbook, right? Like you mentioned, you have the wrinkle, it's available to you. I just think that we're not going to see it every week. This is not going to be a Cordell slash situation unless things start to go left with Russell Wilson, and then you do want to take it. Then you just make the change. I think, yeah. Brian, if this is going to be like a regular thing, especially in the red zone, because no quarterback's going to want to give up the ball when you get to into that part of the field. They want to be the one making the plays. Russell Wilson's going to be the one making the plays, and I think he should be if he's your number one. And if you want to make a different decision on that at some point in the season, fine. But as long as he's the guy, it seems a little bit far-fetched to me that they would be doing something like this with any regularity. I also wanted to say that
those are the most those are the most high stakes opportunities that you're going to have over the course of any drive. And I do still think that's a strength of Russell Wilson. I'm not sure it's a strength of Justin Fields. I think if anything, if you're going to use Justin Fields in that role, I'd do it more between the 20s, short yardage, 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2. You want to try a 4th and 1, 4th and 2, where, hey, keep the defense off balance. We could run. We could throw a quick little thing with him if you're not in the right place. I mean, that might have a little bit more, credence to it. But either way, I mean, I'm just not sure that we're going to see that. The Steelers had a guy for a while like Josh Dobbs who could kind of do some similar things. He wasn't the athlete or the runner that Justin Fields is. I'm not saying that, but if that was a philosophy that Mike Tomlin had, especially when he was, kept talking about quarterback mobility, I kind of feel like we might have seen that more. And, while he's not 24-year-old Russell Wilson anymore, we're not talking about Drew Bledsoe as the Steelers starting quarterback.
Yeah, I was about to say that. It's like, I don't know where this national perception is that Russell Wilson is suddenly like a statue and can't use it. No, he's not as athletic as Justin Fields, but is he?
And whereas he used to be, and he's probably not going to use his legs as much as he used to be. But yeah, I mean, it's still something that he can do to some extent.
Yeah, so I have a hard time thinking they're until things start to go left, and maybe we're week 5, 6. It's a different conversation. But if things go to plan, I don't think you're using Justin Fields the way this report suggested. Brian, I'll get you out of here on this. You've been playing any college football 25?
No. I think those days are past for me, Adam. I mean, you know what? The last time I fired up one of I'll tell you this much: the last game system I purchased was a PlayStation 2. I guess I would have been in like 5th grade or something. The last time I fired that up was early COVID years. My son had just been born. We're sitting in the house with really nothing to do. So he was at the stage where he could just like sit up or sit in a little bouncer next to me. And I got out my old NCAA football and did like a tournament of universities' all-time teams. And I can't remember who won. You know who actually did surprisingly well that I do recall was Syracuse. They had Donovan McNabb on the game. They had some studs on that team. Jim Brown at running back. They had some studs, but no, I don't think I'll be dabbling in the new one. Wish everybody luck who does. Madden was always more of my game when I was in junior high and high school.
I bought an Xbox just to play this new game, Brian. I played some other stuff, but I've been enjoying. I spend less time on social media when I play the video games. I think that's decluttered the brain a little bit.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. It's less toxic than Twitter and all that. Are you going to write about it and then write this off in some way? That would be a really clutch move.
I wish for tax purposes that I could do that. I might try writing about it. We'll see. Stay tuned to postgazette.com. I'll get a little more time in on the game and maybe give you guys a review. But Brian, thanks for joining me. I think you're going to be back Friday. I also will be heading on vacation for a little bit. So
to the basement to play NCAA.
Probably. Yeah, this is going to be a staycation more than a vacation. But I'll be taking a few days off. So Brian and I believe Jason Mackey will be taking charge on Friday. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you like the video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. And Brian, thanks for stopping by today.
Yep, no problem. See you, Adam.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.